one of the biggest choices that any of us can make is how many kids we have. Right? And we know now that, in fact, when given a choice, most women tend to have fewer kids rather than more. This is true pretty much across cultures, and we've seen that as women get access to their legal rights, to education, to job opportunities, to healthcare, including contraception and abortion, that they tend to end up having fewer kids. And in some cases, depending on the culture, maybe even fewer kids than the replacement rate. What that ends up meaning is that we have the potential here to actually see peak population in our lifetime. Right? We may see the most people that have ever been alive at one time on the planet alive roughly sometime after 2050 shortly. Right? If we in fact do a good job of letting people have all the choices they deserve in terms of how many kids they're going to have. But most of those people who are going to be alive in 2050 are not going to be people who have had the same cultural and economic background as those of us in this room. Right? Most people who are going to be alive in 2050 will be living in what is currently thought of as the developing world, and that means they're going to be living in places where the conditions for prosperity have largely been set in this century. Right? So places where there is not massive amounts of money invested in infrastructure, places where there are a lot of things kludged together, in the best case scenario, a lot of things kludged together to give people prosperity out of systems that don't currently exist. We got rich one way, right? We got rich basically by, mining and pumping and growing and cutting and using up a huge amount of resources in order to build the stuff around us. And we tend not to think of the historical carbon that's all around us, but it is. Basically, a lot of the wealth we have is not personal wealth. It's societal wealth that comes from having access to the roads, universities, the hotel conference rooms, the knowledge we've built up, the infrastructure we can use. And all of that stuff has had an enormous cost, right? Most of the climate change gases in the atmosphere, most of the ecosystem damage in the world has been caused directly or indirectly by our getting rich. This on the screen is a map of contributions to climate change in the 20th century. You can see that Canada alone roughly had the same contributions to climate change as all of Africa. Right? And so this has a couple problems with it. Right? The first is that it's kind of a rip-off for everyone who comes after us. Right? We have built our wealth on the problems that our kids and grandkids and probably children for generations are going to have to deal with. Right? It's what some people have taken to calling the massive intergenerational Ponzi scheme. Right? It's sort of ecological Madoff. But there's another problem with it, which is that if we were to see everyone, all of those kids growing up in the developing world, adopt our way of getting rich, right, we will run headlong into an ecological brick wall. We currently use, on average, a little under, in North America, a little under 5 planets worth of resources per person. Right? Meaning that if everybody on the planet were to live like the average North American, it would be somewhere between 4 and 5 planets that we would need to sustain the human population. Of course, that population is growing, so the number of planets that you'd actually need is growing, but also, all prosperity is not created equal. And when we talk about prosperity, what we usually talk about is not how the, middle fifth of North Americans live, much less how the bottom fifth live, but how the upper fifth lives, how the top quintile lives, right? And all of us in this room are probably in that quintile, or at least know very well how that quintile lives, right? How the wealthiest people in North America live. And people who are in that quintile have a much bigger ecological footprint, up to as much as 10 planets worth, right? And the kicker is that it's not just us who knows how those people live. It's everybody on the planet knows how the richest people in North America live. There's this massive phenomenon of vertical emulation, right? Who here saw Slumdog Millionaire? Okay, so that in some ways that movie is all about vertical emulation, right? It's about the very poorest people in a developing world country, like seeing what is possible and seeing it on a regular basis. And that's true everywhere in the world, right? I love the fact that, at least until recently, the most watched television program in all of history was Baywatch. Right? More people have seen Baywatch than know who the US president is. Or at least did until Obama. We'll see if that changes. And the reality is that if poor people follow our path to wealth, right, we will destroy the world.